by saying there's lots of things you never do. Never work with children, don't work with animals, don't work with IT, and never try and do a three-handed presentation. So this is sort of loosely scripted and what have you, choreographed, but we'll go and see with the flow and see where we go. So I'm conscious we need to move this around as well, guys. You need to talk into that. Let me just introduce, first of all, Steve Moffatt. And my opening question to Steve is, who are you and what do you do, Steve?
Right, I'm Steve Moffatt. I run a company called Moffatt Marine. Prior to that, I was 30 years with the MCA as an inspector and other things. I started on the gun fleet, which was pretty well the first. I remember my office when I worked for the MCA was actually on the beach opposite the gun fleet, and two guys turned up and said, "You don't fancy another job, do you? We're looking for people that do wind farms." And I do remember sitting there thinking, wind farms? They'll never take off. So it's lost opportunities, you know, but there you go. But in that area, of course, wind farm accreditors and builders started, who built the small vessels that take people out. So I kind of got involved in it that way. So that's me.
Just before you pass the mic on, how many vessels are you looking at a year, roughly?
40, 45.
40 vessels, yeah.
Yeah.
Right, great. Mike, same question, please.
Right. Good afternoon. My name is Mike Proudlove. I'm the General Manager of Offshore Turbine Services. We're a relatively small vessel operator. We own 7 crew transfer vessels. We operate in both the renewables industry, obviously, but also we do quite a lot in marine civils. And I'll allude to some of those sort of, aspects in the presentation in a minute. So we're obviously inspected regularly, perhaps more regularly than we would care to be, but that's the nature of the industry that we're in nowadays.
So what you have here standing before you is you have an ex-surveyor turned vessel operator, which might be a good thing, I don't know, poacher turned gamekeeper, and you've got in Steve, the guy who's actually going out to do this work. Steve was very modest, he didn't actually say as well, but he also does MCO coding work. So he's got a foot in the surveying fraternity with these vessels as well. The title we gave this was perhaps slightly a little bit misleading, wasn't it? We sort of veered away a little bit from our original title and what we published. We just called it crew transfer vessels here. What came out last week from our discussions, I was expecting you to tell me what a dreadful state these boats are in. They've been around 7, 8, 9, 10 years, some of them out, and they're all getting trashed at sea. And you both surprised me by saying, actually, that's not the case. So can we just have a little dialogue about that before we go into the other bit?
Okay, well, I'll start. I think there's a misconception that crew transfer vessels are pushing on flat out all day. Engines are all breaking all day. The bow sections are crumbling and falling apart. And yes, during construction period, they do work very hard, and so do the crew. But I do also skipper assessments. I go out for companies and watch skippers work, and they do spend a lot of time doing nothing, you know. And if we're going to have a bigger accident, I think often it's when 2 o'clock in the morning, when the vessels have been tied off on a piece of rope because they've got to wait 4 hours, 5 hours before the guys up the tower are coming down. The rope slips and the boat drifts across into one of the assets. So if we have a sort of incident, I expect that's the sort of incident that's going to start. So, but what do you say?
Yes, I agree. I think I'd like to sort of just pop up some slides if I can. I think we need to, if we can put that into some sort of perspective. So yeah, the life cycle of these boats is not quite, I think, as people in many ways didn't predict it. You know, just to look at your typical crew transfer vessel. You know, this is on the larger side, one of the Sea Cats. The majority of them are catamarans, but they're also monohulls, and we'll see some examples in a minute. But for example, the engine hours, Ian made the very valid point. When it comes to any planned maintenance system, time versus use is critical. I know for a fact that SeaCat have had a couple of boats that have actually done over 6,000 hours, engine hours in a calendar year, which, you know, that's hard going for any work boat. Conversely, there are crew transfer vessels doing summer projects that might do 1,500 hours through it and still work perhaps 10 months of the year, but they're doing a painting project. So you've got a massive range of use of these vessels. I'll skip briefly past this. I'll put this slide up last time I was here, a couple of years ago. It gets bigger and bigger every year. There's 105 offshore wind farms in Europe now, 4,500 turbines, and 400, somewhere between 400 and 500 crew transfer vessels. These numbers are obviously increasing all the time, and they're about to go obviously further afield and globally. And what we're talking about is, as Steve mentioned, wind farms as close as Gunfleet Sands, which is very visible from the coast, to the Hornsea 1 project now off the Yorkshire coast, which is over 80 miles. So a very huge range for these boats to operate in. So what are they doing? They're doing just about everything. And in fact, crew transfer is only a very small element of what they do. There are always people, and invariably people being transferred, but with it, it might be 10,000 litres of diesel being transferred to a temporary generator. It might be some painters who are going to touch up the yellow paint on a transition piece. So that's a typical job that Steve was just alluding to, where the crew transfer vessel literally just drops people off, and then would just probably, after taking that photograph, go and tie off to the tower next door, and might spend 6 hours just waiting for those passengers to return. So we've got big variation in use. We've also got a lot of boats that predate the wind farm industry, that have been, particularly in Denmark, we saw a lot of boats being brought in from other industries and used in the renewables industry. And we've also seen a lot of technological developments, with everyone trying to find the perfect vessel for transferring people offshore, the likes of a Swath. And then more recently, you'll all be well aware of the high-speed code, where we've got 24 and even upward of 24 passengers being transferred on workboats that are now operating underneath a sort of a modified high-speed code. So we've got a lot of vessels with a lot of different uses. And if we just get onto that element, and I'll let Steve comment again here. This is there's two important bits to a crew transfer vessel, basically the back end and the front end. The bit in the middle, yes, it carries the passengers, but it's not as actually as vulnerable or as critical as these bits. Water jets obviously dominate in our industry. I think that will change. I think it's perhaps, I think many people would agree that too much emphasis was put on water jets, and conventional shaft lines and alternative propulsion systems should have been examined further, but a lot of investment has been made. At £100,000 each, you're not going to quickly re-engine or repropulse your boat and change it over to a propeller system. So just some typical wear and tear items that we start to see within a couple of years. Top right and up here, we've got, this is the guide vane chamber. You can just make out the impellers, the impeller there, and right behind it is this stator or a guide vane chamber that reverses the flow, so that the flow of water comes out pretty much straight rather than spiraling. These boats spend an awful lot of time just pushed on to a tower going nowhere. And of course, anybody who knows anything about water jets is they were designed really to go over 25 knots. So you're asking a propulsor to do something it wasn't really designed to do. It might not be a catastrophic failure having a guide vane chamber wear, but it'll certainly affect your efficiency, fuel efficiency, speed, and also the running cost of that vessel is largely determined by how well the management team stay on top of that sort of maintenance. Likewise, lower down, we've got the usual other suspects here. Rams, hydraulic rams that are exposed. We've got oil seals on the transom. We've got pollution potential here, as well as a crevice corrosion potential. But I put these slides in particular because I think most of you will be doing, because of the requirements that an IMCA of actually seeing a boat operate, even if it's just a basin trial, surveyors are missing an awful lot of what is going on below the waterline, which there's nothing you can do about. But it is where looking at planned maintenance systems and the other parts of the survey regime, such as the code survey, the outer water survey, that we need, IMCA surveyors, eMISW surveyors need to be aware of what else is going on the boat that you can't see.
Yeah, let me just make a point of that. I've had quite a lot of discussions with people about should code surveyors be doing the IMCAs, and I don't do any of Mike's boats, and I don't IMCA any of Mike's boats, and I don't code any of Mike's boats. But I do other companies, and I do their IMCAs as well. I have other surveyors that work with me who are all AVIs, and they come and do the IMCAs, and I might go and do the code, and sometimes we swap with other companies. So we're kind of cross-referencing what we do. But if we don't get the chance to see boats out of the water, and the only time we do that is during the code, then all we've got is the PMS. And we go through the PMS logically and go through all the red bits that are waiting to be done. And I say to the masters, well, that's been done. That's been done a month. We can't close it out because only the office can close it out. So you don't get the opportunity. You go and try and see whether, if it's something that's obvious, go and see whether it's been repaired. But you can't always, because sometimes it's to do with what's out the water. So I find, first of all, I will state that most now CTV operators like Mike don't want to miss anything. They want everything to be found. They love it when I come and say, this has got to be changed, that should be changed, let's do all the seacocks, because it's money to them if it fails. So they kind of using us now. I mean, when we started 15 years ago, it was, oh God, here comes that bloke from the MCA, But now it's, Steve, can you go and have a good look? Can you, we actually get asked, can you check this? Or you make sure they're all right. So I think that's the way it's gone because of the costings and because how much money they can lose by being stood down.
Yeah, if I can just add to that, I think that there is actually a scheduling issue as well. If you are trying to get so many surveys done on a small vessel during the year, if you don't have a relationship, we use MECAL as our primary surveying organisation. You have to have a fairly unique relationship with somebody who's going to come and do a survey that might be, well, our surveyors often fly from the UK out to Germany to do boats for us. They often do it on weekends, holidays. And we have found if you are picking independent surveyors to do that, there is less of a relationship and you can't call in the favour and say, I need this boat, it needs an IMCA and it needs it quickly. Whereas you can do that if you have an ongoing relationship. I completely understand the potential for conflict here. I was a surveyor myself. But I think that's where hopefully professional standards, should be maintained and upheld, and that's what people need to do. On that, and I know this is a subject which Ian feels very strongly about. And again, I agree with him, but it's this issue of, can you do an IMCA at the same time you do a code survey? Again, I would say, no, that's not ideal. You should really be doing them sort of 6 months apart. That would be the perfect world. But again, can we do that? Can we achieve that? It's very difficult in the middle of a working summer and the boats are miles from anywhere as to how you can get surveyors to those boats. So these are, I'd not say I have an answer, but these are the problems that vessel operators are up against.
Let's dig a bit deeper. You touch on a couple of interesting points there, and the whole practicality of doing this, it is a challenge because you want your boats out there working. This guy wants to come and do an inspection. So, but from our dialogue last week, what became very, very clear is it is now, and you just touched on it, it's very much a collaborative approach now. It's a real team, and that's perhaps is something that has noticeably changed. But Mike, can I ask you, can you briefly explain the role and relevance of the eMISW to the vessel operator and the charter and where it lies in the vessel survey regime?
Right, so for a UK, and I apologise for non-UK persons in the room, if you're a UK vessel operator and you're under 24 metres, invariably your boat's going to have been built to a UK code or to class, but it's probably operating under either the Brown code with the MGN 280 parts applied to it, or it's operating since January this year underneath the edition 2 of the workboat code. So that's the baseline. The boat has to meet that standard so it meets its flag state requirements. The IMCA requirement, or the eMISW requirement, is particularly in renewables, but equally we see it in the marine civils. That is usually a charter's requirement. Now, we may have a boat in January that's not on charter, and we're tendering for work and bidding on jobs. The customer, the charterer, the ultimate charterer, whether it's a dredging company or a renewables company, will ask to see our eMISW at that point. Even though the boat's not gone to work for them, they might be looking at 10 boats at this point. So we don't have any choice at that point but to commission the IMCA ourselves. And I've always thought surveys like an eMISW should really be being done. They should be being commissioned by the reader of that report. Whoever wants to use that report should be the organization commissioning it. But that just doesn't happen. And there's perhaps there is an immediate weakness in the whole system. So we've got our eMISW. We can now apply for work. We're successful on a tender. We're then going to show up onto a site, and we're going to see anything from a very brief health and safety walkthrough, because the customer is very happy to take the MISW at face value. We might have somebody like Specialist Marine Consultants come on board and do a health and safety or a short audit of the vessel to see if everything has been closed out. Or, as many of you may be aware, the most famous one in the industry is the Ørsted in-survey, which is considerably longer than any other form of survey or inspection that you'll experience throughout the year. That could take 6 hours, 8 hours, even on a small cruise transfer vessel. So the IMCA is very much that you need one before you can go and bid for work. But what I'd like to suggest, and particularly later on in this presentation, is that what we need to be doing is making the IMCA or the eMISW of such value that the ultimate charterer only feels the need to go on board the vessel and check, have all the items being closed out? Yes, well then I trust what the AVI has done in his job, and we'll take the boat from there, instead of having to go through the pain of another 6 hour on hire or in survey that we're experiencing at the moment for charters. So that's a sort of the challenge to the surveying community of how we actually perhaps reduce at least the length of the on hire survey.
Question for you, Steve. Typically, are you seeing when you go on board a vessel, do an audit or indeed a survey? Now these boats have been around some time. What are the sort of standard things that people should be looking for? Looked at some things on screen here, but I know there's plenty of other things that you would see. So can we just flash through a few of the things that would concern you and that vessel operators ought to be aware of?
Okay, well, I don't want to turn this into a code thing, but I did list IMCA lists that we find on a really regular basis, and that is there's normally no bridging document. So when you talk to the skipper and you say, have you got a bridging document between your SMS and the company that you're now operating for? Well, no is always the answer. So I say, well, which safety management system will you use then if you have an accident? Good question. When you talk to the companies, the companies will also say, oh, they just use ours. They're only trained to use ours. Well, that's one of the failings I find between operators. And it's usually because sometimes the boat's only there for a week, so they just haven't got round to doing it. You ask for things like work at height permits, hot work, and they will show me from their SMS. There we go. There's a blank work permit. I say, I go through the logbook and I say, I see that someone's come on board that day to calibrate the radar, and can you show me a permit to it? No, they can't. So it's the process that we've got the paperwork now, we've got that far, and it's just trying to get the crew and the skippers to sort of carry out and understand that full extra process, which is the same for the safety management systems throughout. When we started, we actually were going on vessels that didn't have any safety management system. Our company produced one. It was okay for some of the companies that we worked for. But if you go on a company, for example, I'll go on some firm that were based in Brighton-on-Sea, which some of you all know, who have now been brought out by Global, who have got a global safety management system. Well, that will cover their rigs. It's just impractical for crews and skippers to sort of use, really. So that's kind of where we are. If we're talking structural, then this is the progression that's been made. And wind farm vessels have put themselves in the frame and have spent a lot of money in getting this bit right. So, tell us what you spent.
Well, yeah, the original sort of fendering system, which, to be fair, was very successful for a few years. The defenders at the bottom there, just an off-the-shelf product that you'd all be familiar with, used for rubbing strakes and the like. mounted vertically on the bow of the boat, not dissimilar to some sort of, towing tugs and things. That's what we started out with. They do result in a fairly heavy landing. Even with a small boat, it's quite an abrupt stop when you try and push on, even with the best skipper. So that was obviously the implications there is what is that doing to the boat behind? We've found with GRP vessels, they actually probably fare better than aluminium vessels. The welds and structure behind the bow fendering on an aluminium boat certainly requires a lot of attention. Generally, access is pretty good in that area because the operator needs to be able to get behind them to remove them and replace them, whether it's annually or even biannually. We've then had this sort of evolution. The top ones here, Danish company RGC site, very popular at the moment. The rubber technology has resulted in much more predictable movements on the towers. And then we're seeing a lot of people using these sort of cushion fenders. These are big expenses for small companies. Even a simple fender system like that, the orange one on the right, is going to be £20,000 worth just to buy that fendering. So that's a huge increase compared to the sort of the early defenders. But these do result, this sort of fendering reduces the impact on the vessel significantly and on the asset that you're pushing onto. And more importantly, it makes for a safer transfer for the personnel that are stepping over the bow of the boat. I would say in terms of equipment, what we see wear and tear on things, just some, that's a 7-year-old engine air intake. Yes, the fire flap might work when you release it and it shuts well, but the more important question is it actually fully open? It's not an unreasonable request when you're looking around a vessel. Is this panel here on most systems is designed to be open, to be cleaned. You can open that completely, stick your head in and actually have a look and see if the fire flap's actually open fully when the vessel's operating. You've also got things like, is that a great location for that's the fan brake emergency stop? That is mounted in an area, there's a lot of seawater going down the back of it. These are all areas which, require attention and certainly a good look around the vessel. Back to the sort of what a surveyor can't be expected to see. This is the inside of one of our gearboxes. This is a vibration issue that all crew transfer vessels suffer from when you're pushed onto a tower for long periods of time. And we've got basically what was an aluminium housing for this gearbox, and this has worn away the tapered bearings that sit in this part here, and that's generated that heat discoloring the white paint. So again, a good look around an engine room as a surveyor, and that may well come to light. But more importantly, is there oil analysis? Is the company doing oil analysis, both of engines and gearbox? Can they prove to you that what the metal particulates are in their gearboxes and engines? Anybody with a typical engine on a 24 meters south boat, for example, would have probably been a £200,000 purchase per side for an MTU. So I would think any operator would be expect any operator to be doing oil analysis on an asset of that value. Likewise, this is underneath the turbo with the turbo heat shield removed. These hoses were badly aligned or badly placed, crossing underneath the turbo instead of sort of coming further aft. They're hydraulic gearbox hoses, but they were brittle and had aged rapidly from being exposed to too much heat. Part of our ISM documentation with BV is we have a specific annual, it is literally called the Hard to See survey, which we as an operator do every year on our vessels. And we follow all our hoses and all our electrical cables and make records and make any changes to the system. So these are all things which even a quick glance, particularly as many of you are very experienced, either engineers or seafarers, you know where to look. A quick look around and you can soon find chafe. And another area we've seen a lot of problems with, non-return valves being used above the waterline for bilge pumps. And these bilge pumps on a small vessel often don't have any water. The compartment's completely dry. They're not being tested wet. So over time, the non-return valves lock up. And a good surveyor will pick that up, because he'll actually say, right, last time I was here, I've put some water in that compartment. Let's put a bit of water in that compartment this time and pump it over the side. And it was a surveyor actually that highlighted this problem on one of our new builds. The boat was only a month old, and out of the 8 bilge pumps on board, I think 3 of them actually worked. The others, the non-return valves, were locked absolutely solid, and we subsequently replaced them with conventional ball valves instead. Also, this sort of chafe issue, this was another bilge pump hose that had chafed through where it was wearing. So yes, it might not be your responsibility, but as a inspector, these are areas which are quite easy to find and suggest that the operator's perhaps not managing that boat properly. Anything else to add to that, Steve? Sorry.
Just want to add that I always, when I run the deck fire pump, I always put once I've seen and taken a photo of the spray and the jet more than 6 meters, I stick it down into the bilge, and fill up the bilge. And then that's, if you get into a routine of doing something like that, then they know it's going to happen. And what we often find is that the float switch will work, or the air will go up the pipe and set off the alarm on the bridge. The light will come on. The crew and the skipper will say, it's working. But no water comes out. No water comes out the side of the bilge. So,
2 things I'd like to cover. We've got, 7 or 8 minutes left. One is, if you had a wish list as an auditor inspector and as a vessel operator, eMISW has gone through quite a lot of changes. What does it need to change, or how might it change, do you think, over the next, say, 2 to 3 years to make sure that it's still fit for purpose as things tighten up forever? Any thoughts?
Well, I think the key issue here is we have to look at both the maintenance of the vessel, the physical structure of the hull and machinery, and then the operation of the vessel. And they are two, obviously, they're relatively independent things. And I do think there's been a mistake in the industry of obsessing on, particularly on LSA. There are boats carrying tons of equipment. And yes, I'm sure in the event of an incident, they will be the boat will be well prepared. Whether the crew will be well prepared is another matter. And we certainly, as an operator, are aware of that and put a lot of effort into that. It's how, as a auditor, you can address that in the time of a survey. If I can indulge me for 1 second. I've just got a few here that I want to rattle through, because the way I look at a boat, I think you've got the design and construction of the vessel. Well, I'm afraid that's long gone by the time you get your hands on it. You've then got the maintenance of that boat, and then you've got the operation of that boat. And the operation of that boat is both being done by the back office and also by the crew on board. So if we just have a look at some of the things in the eMISW, which you'll obviously be familiar with, but they sort of, I wouldn't say amuse me, but I think they're worth highlighting and discussing. This comment, for example, I don't understand how anybody, myself included, would be able to make a sensible recommendation on that. If you walk on board a boat that you're not familiar with, and it's got MTU engines, Cummins engines, Volvo engines, comment on emergency spares that are per the manufacturer's recommendations. No, I think we need a practical approach here. Steve will tell you, you'd ask to see their inventory list. Have they got a general critical spares list? And then actually go to see if those items are physically on board the boat. If they're not on board the boat, is it the crew's fault because they're not updating the inventory? Or, as you may find out, does the crew then turn around and say, yeah, well, we ordered those months ago, but they never get round to sending them to us, which says a lot about the operator. I'll let Steve say something about stability in a second, and crew's understanding of stability. Radio and navigation, again, I think we need to up the ante a bit here. This statement, safety radio equipment should be tested at regular intervals. Well, we've got perfectly good intervals. They're determined by GMDSS. All of these vessels are voluntary vessels. They're not convention vessels. They're under 300 gross tons. But I would say if you're asking all these boats to carry multiple VHFs, EPIRBs, SARTs, then the testing regime should simply be that it meets the requirements as laid down by GMDSS. And there should be documentation on board. Even if there isn't a radio logbook, the vessel should have a log. It should be recorded somewhere on board. And this one is of particular concern. This one sums it all up in a nutshell, and I'm sure Ian will agree with this. which is this was a vessel, it was one of our vessels, and it was audited just after it came out of dry dock. So it had an IMCA after it came out of dry dock, just been launched. So here's the problem. No passage plan currently on board. The vessel's completing maintenance after a layup period. Full passage plan to be on board following allocation of contract. So there's not really much you can look at, but you could ask to see, ask to see the passage plan, how did they get to the boatyard? So that's first and foremost. But it's this statement here that worries me a bit, because I think this needs to be removed, where it says voyage planning is only essential for all ships engaged on international voyages. Well, my understanding is SOLAS Chapter 5, Regulation 34 says that all vessels that go to sea must have a passage plan. So am I misreading this, or is this just...
No, you're right.
So what I'm saying, and believe you me, the eMISW has come leaps and bounds in the last few years, and you know, when we get audited now, I feel like we're getting audited in a much more thorough manner, which is a good thing. But I just think we need to go further, both from the physical aspect of the inspection process, but also the way it's written, to tighten it up so that our customers are not reading comments like that and thinking, well, hang on, that's not fit for purpose if it says that statement. So just, you know, things like that I think we need to. SMS, Steve has touched on that. I think that's key. Again, another impossibility. Does the SMS address regulatory requirements and industry guidance? He's very generously given us a yes there, but I would say that's quite a challenge in the space of a brief audit to say whether the SMS meets the necessary rate. I mean, unless again you just want to make a general statement, that's fine. And this one here, I would say we operate our boats. We're based in Brixham. Our boats operate as far away as Finland. Management of change policy is absolutely critical. When we change something in our office system, it's all cloud-based, which is great, but somebody at the other end needs to take that document and act on that document. So everybody needs a formal management of change policy in place, and it says no does not generate a finding. It has to generate a finding. That should be a serious finding.
Till date, a lot of masters and small boats don't know what that is.
Absolutely right, and that is it in a nutshell. You're dealing with, we are the sort of the Cinderella here, really, on the whole. You know, the ships like jackups, they've obviously been operating globally, and they're used to operating with safety management systems. You're now dealing with vessels anywhere from 16 to 24 plus meters in length, with crews who are new to safety management systems. But it's our job as operators to train them, and it's your job as surveyors to make sure that we have trained them and challenge us if we haven't trained them. We have a high turnover of crew in our industry, particularly in the seasonal work. You can't necessarily hire somebody 12 months of the year. So that means you are constantly taking on new crew, and you need to train those new crew and make sure that they are familiar with those sorts of management policies. So.
One of the things which is quite important with use of any CMIB or MISW document is it's an international document. And questions are asked internationally, can't polarize to a industry or to the UK or to Europe. And I agree with what all you said there. And I think that's an odd question for an MISW anyway.
Yeah.
Because virtually those vessels have no requirement by law to carry a safety management system.
Yeah.
And in most parts of the world, other than Europe, you go to, they probably won't have one. Yeah. And that's one of the things. If you ask that question down in Nigeria or in India, certain parts of crew vessels there, you've got any documentation whatsoever.
Yeah. So
I think I agree with what you're saying. I think you should be taking that broader view on that. That's important too.
Yeah, no, totally agree with that. And I'm always aware that it was not intended just for the renewables industry. It's a very valid point. Interestingly, these crew transfer vessels are being used a lot in the dredging and the marine civils world, and the likes of the Boskalis, Demi, Van Oord, those companies who also obviously do work in renewables. It is their primary document that they use, and perhaps the safety management system needs to be a separate addendum, or I don't know. You're right. There could be an element there to remove it, so that we can perhaps separate out the physical nature of the vessel versus the operation of the vessel. That's a possibility.
Is it a voluntary implemented system? Because you have, like Ian was same. You have various things, and some of you are pretty good, even though it's not mandatory. You're fully following the ISO code, and you're fully implemented with SMC, with DOC, and others saying, no, it's not mandatory to our vessel. We have no implemented a kind of a safe, self-made system.
Just wanted to go back to the stability issue. It's one of because I've got 3 or 4 swaths, which, although they're quite big vessels, they can't carry cargo. And if you talk to the crew, you say, how do you assess your stability? You know, generally, I expect them to get off the chair, walk around and have a look at the load line, because they often have no idea how much cargo is put on the foredeck. You know, it's just loaded down in big bags. And I say, you know, how do you assess your carrying weight? And they go, oh, I go out and just have a look at this. And I've been out and had a look, and it's just on the water line. But what they never do is log it in the logbook. They never say, check the stability, you know, check the load line. So it is an issue, I think.
On that note, just something that came to light recently, because many of you are aware of the SAN 75 Surveyor's Advice Notice, the MCA. I didn't know until very recently that has been discontinued. Edition 2 of the workboat, they decided, conflicts with it, so it's been removed. Now, I was in a meeting last week with the MCA, and they said they're going to have to, well, we insisted, they're going to have to reinstate something else to replace it, because now we've got actually at the moment a big grey area, with particularly with fuel transfer systems not being properly covered on older vessels, vessels like ours that aren't done under the edition 2. So something also to be aware of in the cargo.
Can I just jump in? So we're almost out of time, but enclosed spaces came up earlier today. Still far too many enclosed space incidents going on. We did talk about enclosed spaces last week. We decided there's not major enclosed spaced issues with these vessels, but there are some other issues. Have you got that lovely slide of the vessel covered in snow? Oh, have you taken that one out? Well, in which case, if you could just create the image and then just explain.
Of a sea cat tied up alongside in Helgoland in late February, early March, covered in about 6 inches of snow, and it was working. The boat was working, and I think obviously that is a serious risk, and how do we make these boats fit for purpose in the winter months in the Baltic, and more importantly was the surveyor access.
Well, yeah, I mean, we turn up, we get a phone call at 6 at night. Oh, you know, this boat's going on contract. Can you come down and do a quick CMID? The boat's where it is. It might be 5-hour drive. You drive 5 hours, you get there, and the boat's down there, you know, and there's no real access. And I know CMID has got one of the questions, you know, how was the access? You have 2 choices. You say, I'm not climbing down that ladder unless you give me a proper access point and all the rest of it, or, you know, you try and find another alternative to climb on and off. I personally, as a rather overweight 64-year-old, will say, unless you give me proper access, I'm not coming on board. But I do know and hear and see people climbing down vertical ladders, people jumping, boats pushing on wooden ladders, pallets stacked to climb on and off, you know. So I'm sure you've all seen it.
It is a nod to safety and your personal safety. It's nothing more than that. But at the end of the day, it is a serious matter, and please don't ever put yourselves in the situation. I think the only enclosed space thing we thought was perhaps the depth of a swath or something. Yes. There might be some issues there.
Yeah, I think the general consensus from our industry was that aluminium and GRP poses much less of a risk than steel, obviously, from an enclosed space point of view. And secondly, a crew transfer vessel certainly shouldn't have any dangerous goods cargo below decks, and shouldn't really be carrying anything in the way of paints or solvents, may carry some lubricating oil below decks. So that, plus good ventilation of spaces, you're not likely to be entering a chain locker as such on a crew transfer vessel, not on sort of conventional size. So I think it poses less of a risk, but certainly you need to be fit and able, that's for sure. There's, you know, the ladder access, and access in the average crew transfer engine room is not somewhere to be going on your own. You definitely should have, and we would always insist that there was a crew member or 2 crew members with any surveyor on board one of our vessels for their safety. So,
brilliant. Gentlemen, thank you very much indeed. Oh, we have a number of online questions. Okay. Stick with it.
Okay, so Ronan has asked, does industry mind to limit the age of in-service CTVs?
Yep. I don't know the answer.
It is back to how much that boat's been used. If it's been well maintained and lightly used, then there are vessels. There's no reason why they couldn't do 20 years. But that, again, I would say that is the job of the surveyor or the inspector to tell the operator and the charterer when that boat is no longer fit for purpose.
Let me just say that there's quite a few vessels that are going through refits, and the boatyards are really rethinking. I've just been involved in a vessel down on the Isle of Wight, which was stretched by 3 meters. All right, it's aluminium stretch, and some will say, well, that aluminium's now 5 years old, and we're putting new aluminium and welding that up there. I mean, that's what you do if you have an accident and you put a hole in an aluminium boat, you put another plate in. It has to be class approved. The construction gets class approved. I know it's kind of sloping it off to somebody else, but that's the only way the code system works. There has to have some approval from class. So that's going to be the way forward. I know we're going to be going down the surface effect vessels that operate on electric and all the other dreams that we've all seen. I was actually the other day looking at you put on a face mask, you drop your mobile phone in, you hit an app, you have an earpiece in there, and you're in an engine room. And you can look through your engine room, you can beam out the pictures that you're looking at to somebody, an expert, an engineer somewhere who can talk you through how to change the impeller on a Cummins 700. It's the world of technology is really coming forward. And I don't know if any of you have heard of a process called Rayguard. There are companies that are using that. It is a complete ship's monitoring system. It monitors if the vessel is over revved, if there's any bumps against it, if there's any impact. It checks about all the temperatures of the vessel. It absolutely checks everything. And if there's anything that it doesn't like, it sends an email to the DPA, the person ashore, and says that vessel has not been looked after properly. Now, from a surveyor's point of view, I can access that information, and to the point, what they're doing now is they're monitoring the times that the vessel alarm went off from the Rayguard system to what skipper was on the wheel, and they don't even have to say, I bet it was in. They just know that master pushes on too hard, revs too hard, and they can determine how that vessel is being treated 24 hours, 365 days. So.
Other questions? Okay. Stick with it.
Okay, Paul just wanted to highlight access to sewage linkage is often a problem because the accesses to them are difficult to get to unless they are lifted out of the water, and access gained from below water level access covers. Surveyors may not be able to access these either.
Yeah, we did cover that. We just said that, Paul, that that's why it's important that we get some access to the regime of engineering, so that we know when those parts were looked at. Hopefully, it'll be on the maintenance program.
Any more? Still going? Okay.
Lots of questions.
If I can just interject, at one point would be then is at what point do we say that we need to increase the survey regime? Should after 5 years it should be an out of water eMISW? We're obviously going through that with our coding, but if coding is not accepted to replace an eMISW, then should an out of water survey be included as part of the process?
Okay, Andrea has asked, are these vessels preliminary surveyed and certified according to Small Commercial Vessel Code of Practice?
You might be able to answer that.
Yeah. I mean, they're coded to either MGM 280 or mean, let's just get this one thing clear. It's the colour code that's the legal requirement under the UK government. And that colour code, whether it's yellow, I mean, it'd be brown for work mode, is at the moment the MCA's process is going to be that they're going to in piecemeal renew and update the colour code, because that's the only thing that we've ever put through Parliament. So the colour code is what is going to be updated, and it won't be all done at once. Apparently it's going to be done over quite a period of time, which gives us a challenge, because then when we go on that vessel, there might well be another MGM that's come out from the MCA that updates that part of the process, and you have to make sure that you keep on top of that side of it.
Again, trying to keep it a bit more international, perhaps, Ian, what's the situation in Taiwan for construction of crew transfer vessels? Are they going to have to be class? Right. If you don't know the answer, then we're in trouble.
Yeah, that's a good question, Mike. There's also somebody else here who also might shed some light on this one. The crew transfer vessels in Taiwan at present, Taiwan is building some of its own. A company called TIPC have built a couple, and I think there's about altogether 4 inbuilt down there. They're being built basically to local legislation, and I say local legislation very loosely. They are trying to follow, I will say, some level of coding or international standard in it. The vessels have basically been designed by European designers, so they've been effectively built to that. But the vessels down there at the moment, there's a mixture of vessels which are being sent from Europe. Obviously, they're under either class vessels to go and work in international waters, but the others are effectively being built. I think more the Chinese standard or Chinese classification is what it is. But STCW 78 is what is enforced down there, not 95. So that's also, so MLC is not also part of it in that region as well. So it's kind of a grey area. I think the only thing I would say is it's going to be more difficult to import vessels into the region because local legislation and what's the correct word for it that you use, Lisa, down there? Sort of local input of people. Look, they have a word for that, can't escape me completely. The localization, should I say. Everything has to be localized where they're trying to keep the money within the region. So builds will be done to them, and it's literally to their standard. I probably don't make much sense in what I'm saying here, but it is a local standard they are building to. You wouldn't expect to build a vessel in Taiwan and then bring it up to Europe, because it would have to be completely recoded, reclassed, whatever you want to do, and you would start from scratch again. So in the emerging markets at the moment, you can import a vessel in, but probably in time to come that will be a non-entity, because ownership has to be by 51% in Taiwan by a local Taiwanese owner or operator. So unless you want to give away 51% of it, it's going to be less vessels actually go down from Europe, I think, and it will be more local builds. China Shipbuilding is one of the companies building down there. Also, there's a couple of diamonds, I think, which have been ordered from Singapore, which have been built under license for Taiwan as well. So,
you've seen the eMISW, obviously you've got the likes of Ørsted down there, but are the other local part of the businesses that are down there, are they recognising and using the eMISW?
Why not?
There are actually some variations to eMISWs and eCMIDs in the region. They are called slightly different names. The context of them is very similar from what we've seen, but I think we've completed 2 inspections actually in the region to our standard, shall we say, of one's an eCMID and one was an eMISW. But there are a number of others which are being used and at present have been accepted by the employers up to date. But they are let's say, a variation from the CMID and MISW.
Do you have any more online questions?
Okay, just a comment from Andrea. He's just saying, so many times the operators reply that the ISM code is just not applicable to this type of boat.
Ooh. I'm in a fortunate position here because we are ISM compliant. My answer to that is you'll all be familiar with the ISM code. It is a very small book, and if you use that as your starting point, you should end up, if it's written well, with a very small safety management system that is applicable to your vessel. The mistake everyone made is they all wrote safety management systems that were far too lengthy and wordy and couldn't be used when actually, and I have to say credit to BV here, they're as quick to tell us we can take things out as we are, as they are to tell us to add something. So I think the ISM code is completely applicable. And from what I hear of the larger shipping world these days, there is the ISM seems to be coming under attack in the big ship world, when actually I think the small craft, we all think it is applicable. And of course, if you're going to operate things under the high speed code, you've got no choice. The new Workboat Edition 2 says that you have to have a safety management system that should bear a resemblance to the ISM. So I think it's incumbent on all operators. The only thing I would say to remember, if I can just add, is do remember there are only 2, possibly 3 people on this boat that you're surveying. So, the paperwork is kept to a minimum for that reason. And sometimes I think people expect a little too much of what a crew can do on a small high-speed vessel in terms of paperwork. But no, ISM is completely applicable.
Steve, anything to add?
If anybody needs a safety management system, we write one. Just let us.
It's just a comment on these things about the applicable rules and regulations for those small workboats, because it's not only in Taiwan, it's just around here in Europe. Take Germany as an example, because if they don't feel like whatever flag state, because the vessel may not necessarily be within class, or may necessarily only be within class within hull. Or even just built to it, and then after they didn't kept it going. So that's why we even hear us doing those IMCA or small workboats within Europe will have to go in and dig into various flag states when we go, and flag state rules when we go on these vessels, because there might not be a classification. You might strictly go into the various flag state rules and regulations, which is the only applicable to that vessel. Germany is a good example. They do their equivalence inspection then.
I've done a few German compliance. It's not difficult.
It's not difficult enough, but it gives you something that you need to also, during your preparation, say, holy, this is a flag state where you're not normally operating with. Cyprus, for example, is still within EU.
Yeah.
A lot of you good crew transfer vessels are on a Cyprus or Maltese flag. Because of the workforce within EU, we have to get the time to properly dig into flag states, because they may not necessarily be classed.
We have one more, and then we'll have coffee.
Okay, so this is a question for you, Mike, from Peter.
Do I know him?
Peter Vandcroft? I don't know. Okay, right. Okay, so what would typically be the amount of hours you're willing to allow the surveyor to do an eMISW for?
That's a very good question. How long would you allow him?
You've almost certainly written off a day, so I would say that's what it is. I mean, a survey is a day, however you look at it. So obviously the cost element is not, if as a vessel operator, we're sometimes given fixed cost options for surveys and inspections. If it's a charterer, then again, I mean, I would hope that somebody would be on the boat. If they were doing it as a standalone, I would hope it would be somewhere between 4 to 6 hours for a sub 20 meter boat, and basically most of a day on a 24 meter. But certainly on a boat like that, it would be most of the day. But I mean, that all comes down to cost. I don't know how much I'm sure there's a huge variety in what people are being paid to do these inspections, but we've written off a day for it.
Steve?
Same. I write off a day or a night. It's because sometimes they say, we're not in till 6. So wherever they are. So yeah, that's it. If it takes as long as it takes, doesn't it? But I've spent a day on it. So.
Wonderful. Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you to the online guys for all their questions as well. Let's break for tea, coffee, 20 minutes. Okay. We'll see you shortly.